Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm Amanda Chicago Lewis, and it's really exciting to be able to have this conversation right now. So I think let's just get right into it. We're talking about, can cannabis end perhaps the opioid epidemic? Can it be an exit drug for narcotics? And I thought maybe, I think everybody on this panel thinks that it can, and so I thought maybe we could start just by having each of us introduce ourselves and then maybe talk about the moment or the experience or the research paper or the statistic that really convinced each member of the panel that this was something that should really be paid attention to. President Trump continues to talk about looking for an alternative to opioids as a non-addictive painkiller, and I think maybe this is something that we all think could really fill that slot. And so how did you come to believe that cannabis could help, be an exit drug? So let's just go in order.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jose Bellin, founder and CEO of Mission Zero, an organization dedicated to ending veteran suicide. Cannabis, for me, has been a life-saving medicine. I was part of the initial invasion into Iraq in the spring of 2003. I arrived in Iraq at 20 years old and I left at 22. I turned 21 and 22. I'm a field artillery veteran, so as you can imagine, with orders to secure Baghdad, we've seen plenty of combat, lost some great friends, and went through those things. In January 2005, I was honorably discharged after completing my 3 years of service, and at that point, I started my 13-and-a-half-year battle with PTSD. I was given the prescriptions by the VA, and unfortunately, each time I was given those prescriptions, I got closer to suicide as opposed to further away. I started using cannabis when I came home from Iraq, but unfortunately, as you know, you get caught in the black market, you become a criminal all of a sudden. I had a very strong corporate career in property and casualty, and so my use for cannabis was intermittent, so I would really either go unmedicated or go to the VA, give them another shot, and yet again, it would just drive me closer to the edge, or pivot to the black market. In the fall of 2016, the VA still found a way to prescribe me nortriptyline and venlafaxine, and those medicines nearly cost me my life. By the grace of God, I did give my wife my firearms. And that was really the moment that I said, you know what, enough is enough. I started using cannabis as a medicine on a daily basis, irregardless of, being drug tested or whatever the case may be. I said, you know what, I need to be the father I was always meant to be, the husband. And from that point, I started using cannabis, and, here I am today. I always tell folks I found my smile again. I know how to feel love, emotion, happiness. Those are the things that are robbed from you. In combat, you become cold, you go through those things, and this is not a sob story, but more of an awareness story for those, out there in the audience to know that cannabis truly does heal those who are suffering, and many of us suffer silently. We have over 22 veterans a day committing suicide every 65 minutes or so. It's happening. This is an open epidemic. The government is keeping us oppressed for whatever reason, and we have to stop it. And I believe cannabis is the key to start healing our nation and putting the care back in healthcare, making it relevant again.
Thank you. And before we move on to Tanji, could you maybe just tell us a little bit about maybe the difference physically and emotionally for you in treating your injuries and your PTSD with cannabis versus narcotics?
Absolutely. When you are treating, with these narcotics, you're already at a point where you're depressed and you're stressed out. And it's very heartbreaking to see yourself actually become angrier, looking for means of ending your life and just having those intrusive thoughts on a daily basis, those nightmares. I watch children die in front of me, and in combat, you don't have time to cry, you don't have time to feel emotion. I watched a little 7-year-old girl die right in front of me. I have a 5-year-old daughter who 3 months ago went to the dentist and laid her down on a table, and what I saw 14 years ago just exploded in my mind. So I cannot even watch my daughter, unfortunately, now lay down even in the evenings without going right back there. However, cannabis allows me to suppress those thoughts, allows me to manage those thoughts, and that's just one incident. You take, a combat vet who, for example, 14 consecutive months in combat, you cannot isolate, one event at a time. So cannabis cannabis, again, at the end of the day, allows me to sleep better. It allows me to be here without anxiety and just function as a human being.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tanjanika. People call me Tangy, which works very well in this industry because it's a popular strain. And I am a United States Marine Corps veteran. I did 2 tours in Iraq, and I was a part of the 2005 invasion in Fallujah, and it was really ugly over there around that time. So my PTSD, and PTSD is a physiological response to a traumatic event. And so my symptoms came from nightmares. I had horrific nightmares. And so when I went to the VA and got the medication from them, I was incoherent the next day. I was unable to function. I was unable to wake up some days. And so it just became something that was debilitating me worse than the actual PTSD. So I remember the last time that I did have a great night's rest was when I consumed cannabis. So I did this little experiment where I bought some and I put it in the trunk of my car, and I was extremely afraid to have it in my possession because I grew up not only religious, but when you are in the military, you are a law-abiding citizen, you follow rules, you don't disobey the law. And so I tried it, and it ended up working out very well for me. Tried it again and again, and when I tell you, not only did I have a great night's rest, I was able to be a more proficient business owner. I was able to be a better, friend, sister, family member, everything. And so because of what I learned about cannabis, I started to see what other communities I could get in touch with who knew about cannabis and how it helped as well. And so I started going to conferences, and I started to learn about not only the medicinal benefits on a scientific level about cannabis, and that's when I knew it really worked for me. So I am the CEO and co-founder of an organization called Marine Queens. And what it is our mission is to educate, empower, and inspire. Oh, okay. Okay. Is this better? Okay. I have a mic now. Okay.
Hey.
We're ready. Okay. So I am the CEO and co-founder of an organization called Marine Queens, and our mission is to educate, empower, and inspire those suffering from the residuals of serving. And so we have done 2 events. We did the Cannabis Me and PTSD Summit, where we talked about cannabis as a pain management solution. We talked about how their military skills strategically transferred over into the cannabis industry, and we talked about their legal rights as well. And so we've been able to help so many veterans, educating them on the benefits of cannabis. And not only that, we did the very first Cannabis Veterans Ball, and we were able to offer a safe space for camaraderie for veterans as well.
Thank you, Tanji.
I'm Dr. Mikhail Kogan. I'm an assistant professor of medicine at George Washington University. I'm a directing Center for Integrative Medicine. I'm also a founder and medical director of a new company, MK Cognition Institute, where we try to treat Alzheimer's disease. My journey in this specific topic started when DC legalized recommendation for cannabis. I was one of the first physicians in the District of Columbia to start recommending it. And most of what happened to me was basically a patient-directed experiences. So patients like you guys or similar patients came and they've had experiences, and I think I was open enough in compared to many other physicians to really step outside of my comfort zone and say, hey, I'm gonna learn this. It's not easy to learn medical properties of cannabis. And over probably 7 or 8 years, gradually with mentorship of some great people like Donald Abrams, I came to really feel comfortable recommending it for all kinds of conditions where I feel it's effective. And I think the turning stone for me was when I really realized, since most of what I do is in geriatrics and palliative care, that we don't really have a better substance for end-of-life care than the cannabis. We have, if you have nausea, pain, and a variety of other possible symptoms, you're gonna have to be getting 4, 5, 6 medications. And here you have one product that can take care of everything. And extremely safely. I have a lot of patients in their 90s and 100s, and the cannabis would be my first to go rather than narcotics. And that's pretty obvious. Why? if you look at the toxicity charts, there hasn't been any death from cannabis reported in the entire history of human beings, and we have 60,000 people die every year from narcotics. And if you look at the data, we can talk a little bit more about it, but it's pretty clear that the country could save 10 to 20,000 lives every year if the cannabis is nationally legalized. I think the other part, what happened last year when National Academy of Science came out with grade A recommendation for chronic pain and nausea, well, I mean, you have to be completely ignorant to disregard that, because that's the largest scientific body of knowledge and experts who coming and saying, look, this is more effective than any existing chronic pain management we currently have in the country. So there seems to be a huge dichotomy, between what we allow to prescribe legally in the practice, and that seems to cause a lot of side effects and a lot of morbidity and mortality. And here you have a, potential effective tool that some of us in certain states can't even prescribe it. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Joe. I'm a 20-year veteran in the Marine Corps with a combat tour in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's funny, back in the green room, found Jose and I were on opposite sides of the river in Baghdad back in 2003. And Tangi and I shared a service bond of both being Marines. And the reason I'm here and I got involved with this issue is because of my job. So I'm the Director of Media Relations at the American Legion, which, if you're not familiar with it, is the nation's largest wartime veteran service organization. We have about 2 million members and about 12,000 posts around the country. And I came to this issue almost as a portfolio issue, leaving my last job and a year ago coming into the Legion. One of the reasons I took the job was because I felt that they were taking a pretty big stand on medical cannabis research. And found out that back in 2016, the American Legion put forth a resolution to advocate for the removal of cannabis from Schedule I of the Controlled Substances Act, and also to break up the University of Mississippi's monopoly on cultivation for research purposes to allow more research into it. And the whole reason is because we've had veterans come to us, just like Jose and Tangi, saying, hey, I was on every drug, zombie drug that, killed Anna Nicole Smith that the VA prescribed me. I couldn't function. I was emotionally dead. I was living like a zombie. And the only reason I'm alive today is because I found medical cannabis and was able to push away all the opioids and benzos and everything else. And now for the first time in my life, I slept for 6 hours. I'm a better dad. I'm a better, parent. I'm a better husband, a better wife, things like that. And that their compelling stories really moved our organization to really go into the body of research and start saying, hey, show us everything supporting this, show us everything opposing removing cannabis from Schedule I, and the balance of evidence clearly fell to the right. And so I'm proud to say that our organization stands behind that. And then last year at our national convention, we pushed for a resolution to have the Department of Veterans Affairs allow their doctors to talk to veteran patients about cannabis in states that had medical cannabis laws. And I'm proud to say that in December of last year, the VA changed their policy to allow that. Just last Tuesday, the House Veterans Affairs Committee put forth legislation to direct the VA or authorize them to do medical research on cannabis, the safety and efficacy of cannabis for ailments that face veterans. So I'm happy to be here today, representative of 2 million of America's wartime veterans, and be happy to talk to you more about our positions on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
So obviously we have a lot of veteran representation on this panel, and obviously veterans are one of our most vulnerable populations, especially when it comes to opioid abuse, handling some of the PTSD and the lingering issues that we've been talking about. And so obviously everyone here is supportive of cannabis, and I'm wondering if you guys could speak to the larger veteran community and whether you feel like this perspective is representative, meaning, do you think the larger veteran community in the United States has a stigma against cannabis use to sort of alleviate the chronic pain issues or PTSD issues, or do you think that this is pretty much what everyone believes at this point?
Do you want to take that one first?
Whoever wants to talk, yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Well, I believe it's 85% veteran household support cannabis use. The issue is the stigma associated with it. You don't want to get turned in by your physician if you say, hey, I'm using cannabis. So what I think the issue is right now is getting us to go out there and say, you know what, I have PTSD, it doesn't have me. And I use cannabis proudly. It allows me to function, and we're not criminals. You know, we're men and women of honor. You know, don't be ashamed. We're not ashamed. We're here behind you. So in my opinion, I believe that, you know, we have a strong stance, you know, within the veteran community, and we just got to keep fighting forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, back in October of last year, we found a donor to give us an amount of money to do a nationwide survey of veteran households. And so we called, or we didn't call, we had a third party contact them and talk to either the veteran or their caregiver about their views on medical cannabis. And what we found out was 92% of veteran households supported medical cannabis research. 83% wished it was a federally legal treatment option in their state. And 20% either were using cannabis to treat a service-connected disability or knew a veteran who was. I mean, that is pretty compelling evidence. It was scientific, statistically significant survey results. So we posted all that online with all the crosstabs and everyone. So if anyone wants to check that homework, it's all there, but completely transparent. And we believe that that's the case within the veteran community, which is, you know, several percentage points higher than the American public, probably with good reason.
Yeah, okay, so we've got really great anecdotal evidence that this is working really well for a lot of veterans. We have a lot of great support, broad support from veterans across the United States. One of the major points of opposition seems to be the slowness with which the Department of Veterans Affairs has moved on this issue, taking so long to even allow doctors to be able to talk to patients about this, and being that sort of main source of medical care for so many vets. What do you guys think would be the most effective way? And of course, you know, the VA is sort of in an interim period at this point, and we're not really sure where it's going with the new guy in charge, but what do you think would be the most effective way to change the VA's mind on this and get them moving on the issue to reflect the perspectives of the United States veterans, you know, at large?
I think that he talked about it a few minutes ago, but I want specifically you guys to know the legislation that was introduced last week. It's called HR 5520, and it is the VA Medical Cannabis Research Act of 2018. And what it does, it basically forces the Secretary of the VA to add efficacy into the plan of the budget so that they can make sure that they study cannabis for veterans, and they do it at least once a year for 5 years. So we absolutely need you guys' help to call in and tell your representative that you not only support this bill, but you support the research of cannabis and veterans, because this is what's needed to change their mind. They need data, and the data is out there. I mean, they can continue to use that excuse because we're federally illegal, but the data is out there of the effects of cannabis on veterans and how it's so helpful, not only for our mental, but our physical as well, the chronic pain that we go through, the sleepless nights that we go through. And so we specifically need you guys to call in for HR 5520 so that we can tell them that this is something that will help us to not only quiet this argument, because that's something that we can keep battling about. As long as it's ambiguous, as long as it's still in the air, as long as we don't have concrete data that this is what works for us, we can continue to have these type of conversations. But when we vote a bill in and we hold them accountable and we say, okay, how is the data going? How is the study going? What is it saying? Then we know specifically what's working and what's not. So I think that's one of the ways.
Yeah, and beyond the VA, I mean, you know, beyond the Department of Veterans Affairs, I think what people need to understand is it's the largest integrated healthcare system in the United States. And so it affects more than just veterans. I mean, I think something like 80% of all clinicians out there, you know, doctors, receive some part of their training within the VA. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so if you can get the world's largest integrated healthcare system to do this research, it's going to have secondary and third order effects beyond the veteran community. I mean, you know, the VA invented the pacemaker. They did the nicotine patch. I mean, they're really good at doing research. And so, you know, despite what you hear in the headlines about the VA, you know, there are some really solid things, solid programs within the organization. And I think it's research that needs to be done, because how else can you make policy decisions if you don't have clinical evidence? And if you're not allowed to take all the studies that have been done around the world on this and incorporate them into, and I know there's other researchers that know this better than I do, but you know, if we have clinical trials and the trials show efficacy and safety, then things will advance.
Yeah, Dr. Kogan, I know you've done work with the VA. Do you think this is the best way to make change happen, the bill?
Well, you know, I think the VA is struggling primarily because it's a Schedule I substance. And so the VA has to respond to the Congress decision on that, essentially. And you know, I think until the Schedule I either gets descheduled or rescheduled, VA will really have a hard time accepting any major initiatives, even the research initiative for clinical efficacy, which I think is obvious for everybody that it needs to happen, and yet Schedule 1 literally means that there is no medical use, and that it's a high potential for the abuse.
Well, you're teeing us up for my next question very well,
Yeah, well.
which is, so, I think everyone's aware that cannabis is a Schedule 1 drug in the Controlled Substances Act. It means it has no known medical uses and is among the most dangerous drugs that we have, highest potential for abuse. And so I'm sure everybody on stage does not think that that's where cannabis should be, but the question is, where should cannabis be? Should it be rescheduled, or should it be descheduled, taken off the Controlled Substances Act altogether? And yeah, what do you guys think about that, and which direction should we try to push that in, and why?
That's a political question, I don't know if I can politically answer it, but I'll tell you, if you simply look at data, if you simply look at the actual evidence, the other things in Schedule 1 are heroin. Schedule 2, you have cocaine, right? So we have cocaine, which is obviously a whole lot more dangerous, basically reported by the government to be safer than the cannabis. It seems to be a very, really nonsensical system in essence, at least regarding to cannabis. So I think if we strictly follow the actual evidence that the cannabis doesn't even belong in a schedule. I mean, it's safer than alcohol, it's safer than, some people would argue it's safer than caffeine.
Right.
Because there's people who died from caffeine overdose, and there hasn't been anyone who died from cannabis. So
just based on a scientific understanding of what the Controlled Substances Act was trying to do, cannabis should not be part of the CSA at all, no schedule.
But again, that's if you simply look at the actual clinical and toxicology data, but then you have a politics in it, which, how do you handle that? I think you guys probably better talk about that.
Well, and I think our official position as an organization is we're not even talking about use yet, but what we are advocating for is research, right? And in our official position right now is at a minimum reclassify the drug as a substance with potential medical value. So we haven't, as an organization, made a recommendation, nor do I think we're really qualified, because we're not clinicians, to say, well, does it belong on 2, 3, 4, 5, or off? But certainly it is completely disingenuous and scientifically ignorant to have it on 1. And I think we're pretty much unified on that.
Okay.
And see, these are politically correct answers. These are, and that's awesome, but the bottom line, it should be descheduled, period. Like, it should not be Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule anything. It should be, it's been used in ancient Egyptian, Chinese, Indian medication, and no one's died from it. Literally, no one's died from it. So if we even just go back to our former pharmacology, we were using it all throughout history. And so if we even just go back to the reasoning that it was scheduled in the first place, like the real reason, all it takes is just going back through history, I feel as though, and just, how did we get here in the first place? And then once we backtrack our steps, we know that it was never scientifically proven to be put on the Schedule 1 classification in the first place. So it should be descheduled, and no one should be going to jail for it. It should be treated like a tomato.
Like it's mayo?
And on
Tomato. Yeah.
On the DEA's own website, I was just here yesterday, and on their own website it says there are no known recorded overdose fatalities.
Right. Right.
World Health Organization said the same thing. I tend to believe both those organizations on that issue.
Well, there was one fatality. It was a monkey that was given 800 cigarettes to smoke cannabis continuously.
Oh,
I don't know
monkey.
which university ethically approved this. Not GW, I can assure you. I would have heard that.
How did you get that past the
And so, well, that's my point. So monkey died, and guess what? It didn't die from cannabinoids. It died from carbon monoxide poisoning. So that's 800 cigarettes. So that's absolutely the case. Now, the Schedule 1, the one a little add-on, it doesn't actually specifically state the deadly potential. It states the chances of abuse and dependence. And we know the data very clear. The dependence on cannabis is approximately 10%, right? So if you look at the dependence on sugar, dependence on caffeine, those are the dependencies I deal in my clinic every day. If you have a variety of different medical problems and you coming in, probably one of the first big things I'm going to talk to you is, addiction to sugar and cigarettes. I'm not going to talk to you about addiction to cannabis because I don't see it. and I've been doing this for quite some long time, and it's simply low. And especially when we give it medically combined with the CBD, I think nobody even calculated that. I believe that the dependence, when you carefully balance CBD and THC, is probably nil or very low. So low that we're probably going to have a hard time measuring that.
Jose, do you want to weigh in on the deschedule, reschedule before I go to the next question?
100% deschedule. They just need to do the right thing. They own the patent for it. Let's just get it, over with. And, there's children suffering on a daily basis. We have overdoses happening. I mean, this is just completely abhorrent. That we're having fatalities on a daily basis. So the longer they keep this on there, the more they have blood on their hands. They know this, and we need to deschedule, and we need to do it fast.
Yeah, cool. So I think I want to segue to a sort of similar question about what we sort of want the availability and access to cannabis to look like maybe 5 or 10 years from now. And I think we have two really different examples of that happening right now. We have, especially with respect to cannabidiol, CBD, the non-psychoactive compound in cannabis, which was referenced earlier. And so we have Epidiolex, right, which is a pharmaceutical version of cannabidiol that is basically being approved by the FDA right now. And then simultaneously, we have Mitch McConnell trying to pass this bill that would legalize hemp nationwide, and a lot of people extracting cannabidiol from hemp. And so this bill potentially paving the way for a more free enterprise situation with CBD, and that being grown and marketed on a more massive scale. So I guess when you guys look at those sort of two visions, I guess really a commercial industry and maybe a tightly regulated pharmaceutical industry, and maybe then also the possibility of people being able to grow at home. What do you think is the ideal path here? Do you want this to be something people are getting from the VA and then is being reimbursed by insurance, but is very tightly regulated in terms of who can, control what's going on? Or would you rather see this, as many people as possible having access, growing it themselves, buying it at stores, or potentially getting a formulation from their doctor? What do you think would be the best thing for helping the most people?
So I had this conversation with a veteran recently, and we were just talking about how it's going to get to a point where we're going to have like pounds for $20, like literally, and people are going to buy them because they consume that much, or they need that much medicine, or it's going to be cheap, whatever the case may be.
And a pound, of course, if you're not aware, can cost anywhere from $500 to $4,000.
Exactly. And so it's going to get so low and so cheap because we're going to have the pharmaceutical companies coming in, and we're going to have, we're going to have a slew of people growing and cultivating at an alarming rate. But I think it's somewhere in the middle that we need to be, because it works as medicine. I think that it should not be ran by the pharmacy, but those growers who are ethical, who have, no pesticide, no mold, who make sure that the quality of medicine is maintained. And I think hemp is the future. So it is also a thriving market, and we should be able to benefit from that as well. It is going to revolutionize everything. And so that is something we should be in the middle of. We should be able to, as veterans, as people, because we're in a capitalistic society. We just have to be realistic about this. And so because hemp is the future, you have to recognize that and recognize what it's going to do. But somewhere in the middle of it being medical and we being able to commercialize it.
But it sounds like you support more of a nutraceutical, like have it regulated the way echinacea is, and you can just buy it. Yeah,
Exactly.
I'll speak to that.
Please.
Yeah, so this is what I do. My life is, most of patients come see me for holistic care, for what's called an integrative medicine. And we don't really have a good regulation of herbals and supplements in this country. We're not in Europe, where everything is basically separated into the nutraceutical grade and then the retail grade. And it presents a certain challenge for the field, and that's, I think, where some of the medical resistance comes from. If patient can buy a product on free market that's not well controlled, and it's really unclear what's in it, how it was grown. You mentioned problem with mold. It's a huge problem, and that's actually why for certain medical applications I always prefer cannabis rather than hemp, because the hemp has to be concentrated dramatically more. So if you have a toxin already to begin with in there, you're going to concentrate that. I'm not speaking negatively against hemp. I'm just saying there's just a lot we don't know. And I think this is a field that can be balanced pretty well and can also be an example for the rest of the holistic versus allopathic medical world or medical life in this country to really be an exemplar. Because if we figure out how to have pharmaceutical industry grow, because there's going to be use for Epidiolex and for Sativex and similar medications that will need to be very at the high potency for certain things. And yet that will never substitute for a plant. I mean, you can't isolate 200 constituencies from a plant and figure out how they interact. We don't even have probably computational capacity to do that yet. And so somehow pretend that the pharmaceutical industry is going to come in and come up with some magical products is, I'm not going to say waste of resources, but actually I think it is. But, you know, so there's going to be some form of coexistence here between the, you know, the plant, or I would say botanical industry, and the pharmaceutical industry. And if we do this politically right, I think there's a huge potential to really effectively control and have a quality of the products. The other big thing is, I think there's a big difference between using cannabis for symptoms, growing cannabis at your own house for certain applications that you can use low cost, actually almost no cost, really, and available. And it gives a patient's tremendous sense of control when you can do something for yourself without relying on a you know, system that's sometimes not so easy to get through. And then also at the same time have a high concentrated tinctures, you know, specific ratios of CBD to THC. Now we're talking, you know, CBDA for cognitive disorders, for Alzheimer's, you know, and then we're going to be talking about THC. So, you know, it's going to be, if we have the clinical research, this field will mushroom with together, hand in hand, pharmaceutical and nutraceutical, or however you want to call it, unless, of course, the pharma comes in and tries to really politically push it. And they will, well, you know, it's all, we live in capitalistic society, so, you know, it's all about the money. And the reality is, I think there is a political moment in the country where if we do the right thing, I think future generations will thank us.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I know you kind of gave us a little poke about a PC answer, but I would kind of push back on it a little bit just to consider that we're an organization of 2 million members from every corner of the United States, and we're a consensus-based organization, right? So we don't take an official position as national headquarters unless our members tell us what to do, right, from all 50 states. And so the fact that 2 million veterans, 10% of the overall veteran population in the entire United States today, came together to say, hey, it's important for us to do this research. I think that is an important thing. And as an organization, we stand behind any evidence-based complementary and alternative medicine that shows promise to increase positive healthcare outcomes for veterans. So I mean, if it's LED therapy, if it's, you know, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, you know, it's like, if it shows promise, you know, as our VA policy director says, if it's ground up cat hair and it shows the efficacy, let's pursue it. Let's check it out to see if it works. Clearly, I mean, with 22,000 studies around cannabis around the world, and, you know, with the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine doing a meta-analysis of 10,000 studies and 100 conclusions released last January, if that doesn't open your eyes and say, let's check this out, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, it's a powerful thing.
But it sounds like you're agnostic about a nutraceutical industry versus a pharmaceutical industry versus...
Yeah, as an organization, we are. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, it's, again, like, if our membership convenes again and says, let's take that next step, but I think what our membership will have to see first, since we're advocating for research and agnostic about the outcome, is what does research say? Okay, let's reevaluate and proceed from there.
Right.
But yeah. So.
Jose, what do you think?
There's a delicate balance. You know, we just have to, you know, keep a laser focus on this. That, you know, I'd rather have, you know, cannabis in someone's household than a bunch of Xanax and opiates. You know, if those can, you know, be out there growing this medicine, you know, just, again, compassionate access, give us the choice. You know, as I, you know, sit here today, I'd rather have access to a dispensary than a liquor store. You know, you have veterans committing suicide, and instead of driving down to the liquor store and wanting to, you know, pound a bottle of whiskey with their pills and potentially end their life. Well, hey, if there's a corner store, dispensary, again, this is medicine, let me take a look, you know, what's inside here. You know, so I think we just have to stay balanced with this issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and especially like the nexus between chronic pain and suicide, right? I mean, when you have 60% of the veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan coming back and reporting some instance of chronic pain, I mean, people are just looking for relief at that point.
Yep.
And I think, you know, as the doctor said, it's just like, what is the safest way to administer relief from that pain so you can have some sort of quality of life? And I think, you know, just on a humanitarian level, I mean, that's just a human empathy and compassion level, that's an important thing to address.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's do one last question, and then we can see if there's anything from the audience. So I imagine that like you guys, I tend to be the person who knows more about cannabis in my circle, so I get all these questions from people all over, people I haven't talked to in years and years, suddenly contacting me over social media, asking all kinds of questions about cannabis. And so I think especially when it comes to veterans, but just people in general, what are you saying, what kind of advice are you giving to people who are struggling with opioids, who are struggling with a relative that's struggling with opioids, or struggling with PTSD when they live in a black market state?
I think it's important for us to educate, get out there and have conversations with them. A lot of folks just need to be educated. Say, you know what, give it a shot. See what this has done for me and what it can do for you too. And I think if we keep driving that message through, I have many, my mother, for example, completely against cannabis, from childhood. And my mother suffers from depression and all these ailments. And now my mother's a proud patient, uses CBD on a daily basis. And instead of having to, take all these pills on a daily basis, she uses her tinctures and is pain-free. She sleeps at night and she's found herself as well.
And you say, so does she live in a state where there's
Yep,
medical
Florida.
cannabis?
Yep,
Well, so
absolutely.
there you go. Yeah.
So yeah, I have friends who are not in compassionate states, and they're veterans, and they risk their lives and they risk their freedom daily, and it's something that we constantly talk about, because in California I feel very free. I feel very I'm able to medicate when I'm able to, or go get my medicine when I need to. So I always tell them, not only be careful, but I would rather see them on that than the suicidal tendencies that they had on the pharmaceutical drugs that they were given and that they were prescribed. And what I do is we educate about the difference between hemp and regular cannabis, because industrial cannabis helps, but only to a certain extent. You need that whole plant in order for your symptoms to really start to see them go away. And so we educate about that as well, and we tell them you're not doing anything wrong. 5 years from now, everybody's gonna laugh at everyone that thought, we were the crazy people. I can't believe you were talking about cannabis. We were the pioneers. We were the ones that knew. We were right. We knew the truth. We knew the science. And so that's what we help them to understand, it's okay.
Yeah.
It is okay.
So you say, this level of relief is worth the legal risk.
It is.
Yeah, because it's people's lives. Yeah.
It's people's lives.
It's not an easy answer to this question, I think. But the cannabis is not the only effective chronic pain treatment. There are many others that are considered alternatives or integrative. Acupuncture. VA is actually one of the front runners in integrative care. And there's a National Office of Patient-Centered Care with an integrative medicine sub-office. And the VA does cover acupuncture, and in many VA centers it's offered. So there are other methods. I think it's really important to find provider who would really see you as a whole person rather than as your pain in the leg and a number in the office number 5. And I think that's where the real transformation starts, where you align with a care team that really cares about you as a person. And then what the tools in that format, I think it's actually even less critical. I think you can find approaches, and yes, the cannabis is an effective tool, but I don't know what to tell to the patients in state of Virginia that are coming to me, because I can't really legally do anything about it. And yeah, it dramatically limits my practice, but you still find a way to work, and as long as you truly follow the evidence, and there's a lot of evidence for alternative and integrative modalities. We just don't want to look in there. We tend to follow what's the standard guidelines, and standard guidelines are quite often managed by, industry. Yeah.
Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, one of my favorite authors once said, in a democracy, you have to be a player. And so I think it's easy, if you value veterans, and I hope you do, it's easy to say, hey, thank you for your service. But the way you really thank veterans for their service is by picking up your phone and calling your elected officials and saying, hey, damn it, actually push forward the VA Cannabis Research Act of 2018. That's one way you can thank a vet for their service. It's we have to do something. We have to be good by doing good. And I think one of the ways we do is by bringing political pressure to bear to force the federal government to do the research that they should be doing. So, because it won't just affect, VA research has ripple effects throughout the entire healthcare community. It's not just veterans. In a way, you're helping yourself. If you believe in research and science, let's do it for crying out loud.
All right, so we maybe have time for one or two questions. Oh, goodness. All right, how about you right there? Yeah, you. It's you.
This question is directly for Dr. Kogan. You talked about other alternative treatments for pain. What's your stance on the plant kratom?
On what?
Because I see a lot of parallelisms when it comes to that.
I can't.
So if anyone didn't hear, this gentleman's
Yeah, we didn't hear
asking
the
about
question.
an alternative medicine or I guess an intoxicant or something like that known as kratom or kratom, K-R-A-T-O-M.
I don't know what it is, and I don't use it in my practice.
He's never heard of it.
I've heard of it, and I've heard veterans having success with kratom. And other people, not even just veterans, like 86% of the population suffers from PTSD as well, and kratom has been effective treatment for not only that, but pain management as well.
Anyone else? Great.
Hi, I'm Annie Rouse. I'm with Anavi Market and the podcast series Anslinger, The Untold Cannabis Conspiracy. When you look back at history, most of cannabis regulation is blamed on people like Anslinger, DuPont, or Hearst. But the pharmaceutical interests have always played a very large role in that. And you can see this with THC in the plant form being Schedule 1, but Marinol, its synthetically identical compound, being a Schedule 3. How do you all see pharmaceutical interests playing a role in the conversations between rescheduling versus descheduling?
That's beyond my scope as
Yeah.
a veteran advocate.
Well, I think we've all talked about capitalism
Yeah.
and the role that dollars
hard
play, and I think it's not very difficult for anyone to understand that the most dollars on the table in this situation is coming from pharma, and so I think they play a very large role, though probably not one that's publicly acknowledged as much as it should be.
Yeah, pharmaceutical industry is what a second or third largest industry in the country. So the amount of lobbying that they have, of course, can influence this, no matter whether you believe in conspiracy theory or not.
Anyone else? One more. Great.
Likely the industry would push for producing stuff massively and using agricultural rules to do it, and that allows a certain use of different kinds of pesticides and other things that the industry would push for as they try to make profits very quickly. So I wonder how we should deal with that.
Yeah, I'm personally extremely concerned about this. There's a data that at least in both industries, there's a traces of contaminations, and the high quality growers, those who do a very extensive analysis of each batch, capable of controlling for that. So, as you know, pharmaceutical industry does not require to grow their raw materials organically, and that's concern. I don't know how to politically answer your question and how to handle this, except to say that if we maintain the botanical growth, there are a lot of companies that would say our hemp or our cannabis is organic. And I think that's really the way to move forward.
Yeah,
Oh, grow your own. Yeah, thank you.
yeah, I think I'll stand with you on that because I think I did like 55 hours in WMD training, and one of the things we looked at was how nerve agents work. And when you find out that nerve agents are just super concentrated pesticides, derivatives, I mean, it's not good for you in any amount, I don't believe. So, yeah, absolutely.
So it's imperative that you know where your source is coming from, who grows it, and what ethical options or treatment they use for their plant, because that's important, and that's what that mass cultivation is going to look like. That it's a cheaper way to grow, it's a faster return. It makes sense capitalistically to grow that way. So it's about fighting that, making sure we fight on our own to make sure our boutique growers still have a fight in this game, and then making sure that you know where your source comes from.
Yeah, and I think certainly, what Dr. Kogan was speaking to before about the importance of using whole plant medicine and, the widespread nature, diffuse nature of who's actually growing cannabis, right? The seeds are everywhere, the plants are everywhere. It's very difficult to control, I think is a big part of why we haven't seen pharma actually push for legalization and push for cannabis, because they can't control it, and so they can't profit off it in the same way, and therefore they're against it. until they're for some form of synthetic or isolated cannabinoid. So yeah, I think that's probably going to be a major struggle in the coming years. And I think we're totally done, but thank you so much to all of our panelists and to all of you.